The investigation into Jamal Khashoggi's possible murder continues. All eyes are now on the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed Bin Salman, who appears to be distancing himself from the scandal. But can he really? And will it affect his grip on power? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Hazem, Sika. Saudis close to Crown Prince Mohammed Bin Salman may be involved in what Turkish sources say is the killing of Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Jazeera has been told that a bodyguard for the Crown Prince led the operation, which led to Khashoggi's torture and death in Istanbul. He was last seen entering the Saudi consulate 15 days ago. A joint Saudi-Turkish investigation team searched the building. Turkish sources say there is further evidence that suggests Khashoggi was killed there. The Saudis are continuing to deny any links to his disappearance. US President Donald Trump is defending the kingdom, warning not to jump to conclusions. The US Secretary of State has been in both Ankara and the Saudi capital after meeting King Salman and Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Mike Pompeo says a credible investigation is underway and no one will be exempt from being held accountable.
They made a commitment to hold anyone connected to any wrongdoing that may be found accountable for that, whether they are a senior officer or official. They promised accountability for each of those persons whom they determine as a result of their investigation deserves accountability.
Including a member of the royal family?
They made no exceptions to who they would hold accountable. They were very clear. They understand the importance of this issue. They're determined to get to the bottom of it, and that they will conduct the report, and we'll all get a chance to see it. They each promised that they would achieve that for us.
Well, let's bring in our guest now to talk more about this. Joining us here in the studio is Mohammed Cherkaoui, Professor of Conflict Resolution at George Mason University. In London, we have Saeed Al Shehabi. He is a columnist with Quds newspaper and leader of the Bahrain Freedom Movement. And joining us from Chicago is Soner Chaptai, director of the Turkish Research Program with the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. Good to have you all with us, gentlemen. Let's start with the Turkish perspective on this, since that is at the center of all of this. So, Soner Chaptai, as far as the latest developments that we're getting on this now, more details about what the Turks say is that a killing has taken place in the consulate, and there is a search now of the Consul General's residence. What do we expect to emerge from there, and what will investigators be looking at?
So what we saw is Turkey first started releasing evidence to suggest that a murder took place. And then last week on Friday, just as Presidents Erdogan and Trump made up after Turkey released American pastor Andrew Brunson, who was in jail in Turkey, that was the reason for the Trump-Erdogan makeup. Turkey went into a strategic pause. It stopped releasing evidence. Unnamed Turkish security officials stopped talking to journalists. And I think that is primarily because Erdogan was hoping that behind closed doors, he would convince Trump and the US administration, now that he had made up with Trump, to publicly back Turkish position. But we saw in the last few days that if not the whole US administration, definitely President Trump is trending away from Turkey's position and closer to the Saudi position. And I think, therefore, the Turks have decided to start leaking evidence again. So yesterday, Secretary Pompeo was in Ankara, U.S. State Department Secretary of State. And I think it's either to build pressure on Secretary Pompeo or perhaps even so that he takes a message back to Washington that Turkey will not back down. Turkey started releasing evidence again. Journalists who had access to audio tapes or who talked to people who had access to audio tapes started painting the details of this gruesome murder. So I think Turkey's back on the offensive now. Whether this is a strategic offensive, it will last, or tactical, depends on to what extent the U.S. position aligns with Turkey, especially once Secretary Pompeo comes back. I think at this stage, Turkish President Erdogan can take nothing less than not just a complete apology, but someone pretty significant and important thrown under the bus so that he will accept to embrace the exit path that the Saudi authorities want to take, claiming that this was not a cleared operation when the murder took place. I think it's getting more complicated than Erdogan thought in the last week, and it all depends on what America does next.
Sona, when you say someone needs to be thrown under the bus, who would that person be? I mean, how high would it have to go up?
It's hard for me to judge. I'm not an expert on Saudi politics, but I saw today that the consul in Istanbul, the Saudi consul, was relieved of his duties. That just doesn't sound convincing to the Turks, that the whole operation of 15 people allegedly flying into Istanbul at the same time that Khashoggi was at the consulate, staying there for 2 hours and leaving. And if the audio tapes are indeed verified, carrying out a murder, that all of this could have taken under just the auspices of the consul. I think it would have to go higher than that, but I'm not an expert on Saudi politics, can't say how high, but clearly there are two elements here. One is that the alleged murder took place on Turkish soil, so it's a violation of Turkey's sovereignty, and Turkey is very envious of that. And secondly, Khashoggi is somebody who had really close ties to many people in the Erdogan administration. So this is also personal for Erdogan. He has to push back in order to not to have his charisma and his strongman image domestically and internationally undermined. And I think that's why if the Saudis are to take the quote-unquote exit path, they have to give something in return that is convincing for Erdogan, but also for the international audience that is watching this terrible tragedy.
Mohammed Cherkaoui, what's your take on how the Turks have handled this investigation? Because there is a delicate balance at play here in terms of Turkey's relations with both Saudi Arabia and the United States, two countries in which it has a great deal invested here.
I would say that the Turks have manipulated this process of figuring out what happened. So we have not seen the full story of what they have discovered in terms of evidence. So there has been this diplomatic process going on in the first 2 weeks with Riyadh, and then now with Riyadh and Washington. So I think the Turks have not revealed their evidence because they are more concerned or more interested in development a new triangle where they can have a win-win situation. So Erdogan happens to be somebody who is a tough negotiator, and I think now with the arrival of Prince Branson at the White House, I think there has been new rapprochement with Washington on...
This is the American preacher who was released
from Turkey.
From Turkey.
So I don't think that he was released without a kind of compromise, and I think the Saudis are paying the price both ways, to the Turks as well as the Americans. And at the same time, the Khashoggi scandal now happens to be a new low in Saudi politics, and I think we should also remember that Erdogan and the Saudi leaders have not been on good terms. So we still have to wait to see where this investigation process will lead us within the next 3 months, 4 months from now.
So from what you're saying, then the Turks are keeping their cards very close to the vest here, and it's a matter of when they play them. So
well, we have seen how the evidence has been manipulated. It has been a process of a drip, kind of
anonymous sources,
yeah. And also with some selective media institutions inside Turkey. So I don't think that this is the proper legal way. Had it been in London or elsewhere, we would have seen the prosecutor or the Ministry of Interior appearing before cameras day 1 or day 2. He or she would reveal what the outcome of the investigation, and also sort of tell us what is the point of demarcation between what is evidence and what is just speculation. So I think, in short, the Turks have turned this scandal of Khashoggi's death into a circus, a political and diplomatic circus, more than the whole process of.
All right, let's get Saeed Al Shehabi's take on this. Should Turkish investigators just simply be able to do their jobs here, regardless of the political and diplomatic considerations? Are they being allowed to do that?
Thank you very much. I listened to both contributors, and I can see that everybody is not really clear about how the Turks are conducting their own investigation and also how they are calculating their next move. But so far, I think for Turkey, so far so good, because they have not rushed to judgment. They have not rushed to declaring a position. They have not exposed all the information in their hands. So they are in a stronger position, especially, I think, one of the most important thing that I personally, for example, didn't think that Mr. Trump and his administration would take such a strong stand with regards to Saudi Arabia. Yes, they are trying to brush aside, to brush it off. They are trying to probably to protect the Saudis. But at the same time, there is so much evidence and so much media attention inside America that I think the White House could not simply brush all this aside and cling to the position they had originally. So the Turks have been manipulative enough to be able to drag the Trump administration into this mess. And I think the stakes, they made the stakes too high for Riyadh to come out from this quagmire. So I believe that the Turks will continue their investigation. And as my colleague earlier said, they will continue to give small hints one at a time in order to really close the circus around the Saudis. Because the Saudis have done a really bad job, not just now. And the Turks have also been very skeptical and angry about the way the Saudis had handled many other issues, several other issues, including their relations with Qatar. This is madness. This is absolute madness. And the world is coming to realize that Mohammed bin Salman has been a disaster for the West. And especially for America, yes, he is giving money, but at the same time, he is making everybody unhappy around in the region. So I think the Turks have played their cards so well so far, but also they are also afraid that the Trump administration may stand at the middle of the way and back up or back away from the whole process.
Well, we just want to remind viewers as well at this point that we did make several efforts to reach out to Saudi voices on this and pro-Saudi voices, but we were unsuccessful. We're going to expand a little bit on this now to talk about the implications that this has for the United States and for Mohammed bin Salman. Now, U.S. President Donald Trump criticized the rush to condemn Saudi leaders in an interview with the Associated Press. He said, well, I think we have to find out what happened first. You know, here we go again with you're guilty until proven innocent. I don't like that. We just went through that with Justice Kavanaugh, and he was innocent all the way. So I was unconcerned. A U.S. Republican Senator Lindsey Graham is accusing Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman of ordering the journalist's murder.
Well, I know this. Nothing happens in Saudi Arabia without MBS knowing it.
Who's MBS?
He's the 33-year-old crown prince who jumped over other people. He's the son of the existing king, and I think he's on a bad track. I can never do business with Saudi Arabia again until we get this behind us.
Right. And what does that mean?
That means I'm not going back to Saudi Arabia as long as this guy's in charge.
So you're saying the crown prince has to leave?
It's up to them, but I'm not going back. I've been their biggest defender on the floor of the United States Senate. This guy is a wrecking ball. He had this guy murdered in a consulate in Turkey, and to expect me to ignore it, I feel used and abused. I was on the floor every time defending Saudi Arabia because there's a good ally. There's a difference between a country and an individual. The MBS figure is, to me, toxic. He can never be a world leader on the world stage.
So what does the president do? Sanctions?
It's up to the president. But what I would do, I know what I'm going to do. We're going to sanction the hell out of Saudi Arabia. You know, we deal with bad people all the time, but this is in our face. I feel personally offended. They have nothing but contempt for us. Why would you put a guy like me and the president in this box after all the president has done? This guy's got to go. Saudi Arabia, if you're listening, there are a lot of good people you can choose, but MBS has tainted your country and tainted himself.
All right. Pretty direct comments there from Lindsey Graham, U.S. Republican senator, not pulling his punches there, as we just heard. And he, interestingly enough, is a senator who has been very close to President Trump politically. What do you make of that?
A couple of interesting points. Now, the Khashoggi's death, I'm sorry to say, has become the Khashoggi deal, both in finance and politics, in two dimensions. One, the Turks have utilized this scandal to improve their relations with the White House, and they are getting what they wanted. At the same time, the more I listen to Senator Lindsey Graham and others who are representing mainstream politics within the Republican Party, I sense that this is an investment in an anti-Trump platform toward the elections in November, midterms, and also in 2020, because Lindsey Graham is one of the strong candidates who would like to be taken seriously. So there are several corners or several players who are betting on how to manipulate and how to capitalize on Khashoggi's death, and this is not really where we are. It seems to me now, by the third week of this problem, we have moved from the tree that has hidden the entire forest, and these are these new trees that we are discovering. Everybody is trying to make a bet and make some capital over his death.
Saeed Al Shehabi, what do you make of this then in terms of what it means for Mohammed bin Salman? Does this kind of put the brakes on the way he has pursued power at any cost?
Well, I think the world has waited too long for this man to go. They didn't act. I mean, he waged a war on Yemen. Why? Why did he wage a war in Yemen? Now that more than 10 million are on the brink of famine, and the whole world is condemning, except the politicians, condemning that war. He kidnapped the Lebanese prime minister. Who would do that? Have you ever heard a government kidnapping the prime minister of another country? As simple as that. And he was a guest of honor in his courtyard. So, and now he has done this. And of course, the way he did with the GCC, he has destroyed the GCC, the Gulf Cooperation Council. He destroyed it. It is almost 40 years now since it was established in February 1981, and now he has destroyed it. Well, I don't think there will be any talk of a real GCC, no revamping of the GCC again after what he did by excluding Qatar, attacking it, and having enmity even with Oman, with the Sultanate of Oman. And also angering Kuwait when he wanted it to take a stand against Qatar, but the Emir of Kuwait didn't do that. So he, in the last 3-4 years, since 2015 when his uncle passed away, he has brought disaster after disaster after disaster to his own country. And which Saudi or any other leader would antagonize his own family, arresting them and putting them in the Ritz for 2 or 3 months, and then extracting their money for? I mean,
all right. So just
really
if I could just stop you there for a second,
before.
Mohammed. Do you think that there's going to be any pushback against him then inside Saudi Arabia? Does anyone there have the power to do that?
I think only if the Americans are willing to accept a change. And I am not sure whether he has left anyone behind with integrity and strong character, because he has humiliated everybody. And I am not sure. I think there is a serious case for a regime change in Saudi Arabia. This regime has failed its own people before failing the world and before failing the other concepts like human rights and dignity and security. So I believe that it is time that the world really looks seriously at the possibility of a regime change in that kingdom, because the outcome so far in the last few years have never been except disasters and insecurity.
So we just heard from Saeed there, calling this disaster after disaster for Mohammed bin Salman. But do you think what's happened in Istanbul will ultimately be his undoing now?
I think the problem here, and here I'm thinking of Lindsey Graham's comments, is that taking into account that American foreign policy has two heads, White House and the Congress. This seems to be a pretty significant public diplomacy debacle for Saudi Arabia in Washington, especially judging from the Congress side. And I think this explains Lindsey Graham's comments. Here's why. We don't really know what happened because we don't have the full tape or full evidence of the alleged murder at the consulate, whether this was a rendition that went wrong or they wanted to intimidate Khashoggi or torture him to death. But either way, it's completely unacceptable. Here's why. It's not that the Saudis, in my view, targeted and potentially killed a dissident. It looks like they did. It's not that they targeted a journalist. Looks like they did. It's not that they did all of this on Turkish soil, therefore creating a crisis with Turkey. They did. But they also targeted a Washington Post columnist. And I think there's really no way to dig from under this. That's America's one of most prominent papers, most respected, read by everybody in Washington. There's not a single person in Washington, D.C., including senators, who don't have 50 Washington Post columnists in their address book on their phone. So this is very clear close to home for so many people. And I think it is because it is the Washington Post columnist aspect of this alleged murder that makes it really difficult for the Saudi royal family to dig under this and just say it was a minor incident, it wasn't cleared. I think that we haven't really seen the end of it. I also believe that Erdogan will continue pushing. I think that ideally Erdogan's plan A is to not have a rupture with the Saudis. That's why he was hoping that Trump would mediate between him and the Crown Prince. And that's why he didn't divulge full evidence. I think this is the reason why the Turkish tactic so far has been drip, drip. And Erdogan has been absent. He hasn't personally charged the Saudis. He had unnamed officials of the Turkish government do it. That's because his plan A is to avoid a complete rupture. But increasingly, I think if the Saudis do not take the kind of exit path that Erdogan wants them to take, this could lead into a more significant political event that will be of a rupture. I think it's something Turkey is avoiding. It's probably why Erdogan took a call from the Saudi king and they spoke. And so I would say that's still his plan A is still where he wants to go. He doesn't want to be forced into plan B. That would be a complete rupture with the Saudis. And of course, that means at least a dozen, perhaps 10 countries that would follow the Saudis, that would enter a rupture with Turkey. So that will be a significant blow to Turkey's foreign policy and its ambitions in the Middle East.
All right, we'll give what's probably going to be the last word on this then to Mohammed. How do you see this playing out then? Is this something that the Saudis can ultimately ride out, or will we see something else happen?
I think this is a moment of truth in Riyadh for Riyadh. Mohammed bin Salman has become number one enemy to Mohammed bin Salman, his father, and the entire government in Saudi Arabia. I think he has his power peaked a long time ago. Even, I would go back to early summer 2018 with the controversy of the Aramco IPO and how King Salman...
The sale of the
5% that was supposed to bring $100 billion for the 2030 vision. It didn't work. King Salman intervened and stopped everything. So I think if in terms of political sociology, his momentum was exhausted a long time ago, and there is now a decline of his power, although he managed to establish a kind of deep state within the Saudi state. And I'm not kind of in favor of the idea that we should have this ambitious expectation that he will be removed or there will be a regime change in Riyadh. I would say that he will be sidelined for a while. He will disappear from the public eye till the king kind of find a compromise where he is still part of the decision-making and his son would remain crown prince.
All right. It'll be fascinating to see how this does continue to play out, but we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you to all of you. Mohammed Cherkaoui here in Doha, Saeed Al Shehabi in London, and Sonia Chaptai in Chicago. Thanks very much for being on Inside Story. And remember, you can see this program again anytime. Just go to our website, aljazeera.com. And for more discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And you can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle there is @AJ Inside Story. For me, Hazem, Sika, and the whole team here, bye for now.